Welcome to Wise Up on Air. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Excellent introduction. Love having musicians on the team. Thanks for joining us today. We got a super exciting episode 2 of Wwise plugins for you. And I'm joined here today by special guests and Audiokinetic developers, Samuel Longchamp and Michel Donny. Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So, before we jump back in, let's get some short introductions out of the way. Samuel, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. My name is Samuel Longchamp, cross-platform team lead here at Audiokinetic, working on getting our software to the next level, getting stuff working on the Mac, working on Windows, working everywhere.
Excellent.
And me, I'm Michel Donnet. I'm currently the integrations team lead. And I used to be the one that created the new plugins that maybe we will talk eventually. So I worked a little bit on all of that, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Great. Damian Kaspauer, product manager here at Audiokinetic. And again, you're here on Wise Up on Air. This is a hands-on edition, and we're going to get our hands on some Wwise plugin development. This is part 2 of a multi-part episodic journey into Wwise plugin development. If you haven't caught up with part 1, jump back in time and check that out. Do you guys have like a high level of what we went over? Are we going to talk about that a bit?
Yeah. Actually, can just have a look maybe.
Excellent. Then we'll roll right into that. And I will just say up front, folks who are hanging out in the chat, we're keeping our eyes peeled there. As we're going along, let us know if anything needs a little clarification. We're taking this ride with you, with the community, and trying to bring a level of accessibility to this part of the Wwise pipeline. It really unlocks a lot of cool potential in your interactive projects, and we'd love to get some questions and help clarify anything that comes up along the way. So, ready or not, take it away.
All right. So today, Wise Up on Air. So happy to be here. Just like Damien mentioned, we're going to go over a bit on what we touched on part 1, see where we stand, and we're going to see what part 2 has to offer for us. It's going to be in the form of a quiz. Haha, it's going to be fun, I'm sure. Prepare your pencil and a notepad. Nah, it's just a joke. And we're right, of course, as part of that, an authoring plugin. So if you do remember part 1, we did a couple of things. Mostly setup in the beginning. Oh, that's dark. That's very dark.
It is dark.
That's okay. We're doing it live.
Exactly. Let's change the font to something we can see, please.
You can just do that. This is real life.
That's not it. Please allow me to put some font that is pale enough for us to see. There you
Font
go.
energy.
All right. With that taken care of, we're going to see basically what we saw last time. Exactly. We presented an overview of Wwise and plugins. So if you haven't seen that, please check it out. Very informative to know where we stand. And we installed Wwise dependencies. So we have the launcher. I hope you do have it at home. We have Visual Studio installed. We get Python, all kind of stuff. And we have coded something that we could build and test in the authoring. We did all that using wp.py, which is the development tool suite that ships with Wwise. It's a set of Python scripts that you use through the command line with some commands. And we use that to create and build our gain plugin, which was the WoA gain. And we saw that we actually did change the meter level using that gain, so looking good. Some of the actions we took using the development tools here, that's just a quick reminder for reference. We used the new, which creates a new plugin using templates. We used the pre-make, which creates solutions for you for the target platforms. In this case, we use Windows. Therefore, we created Visual Studio Solutions. And we used the build command, which uses a solution to build the project and basically exports the libraries and the required files for you.
Yeah, and the way I think of it is that part one was really about setting up your environment, taking those first simple steps of, picking through code, deciphering, comments, and understanding the workflow for how you iterate on your plugin and build something cool. Can't wait to jump into part two.
Yeah, and part two is really just a continuation of that. So what we have today for you is creating a custom graphical user interface. So the last time we did have something to play with, but it was the default behavior. Now we're going to add something more customized and show you how to do that. One thing we did not touch also is displaying monitor data. So stuff that the SoundEngine has to send to the authoring, and then we can display. We're going to add documentation to properties, so show you where the documentation is and how to add it for your plugin, and packaging the whole thing so you can share it with your friends and install it through the Wwise launcher. That's a big menu. We're going to go step by step, don't worry. And if you want to follow along, please do. There is a GitHub repo I set up on the Audiokinetic domain that you can just grab the files, start from there, and follow us. So Audiokinetic GitHub, it's called WUA plugin, WUOA plugin.
Wwise Up on Air plugin.
Wwise Up on Air.
Yeah.
Exactly. So from there, the new stuff that we're going to learn today is the two remaining commands from WP, which allows you to package the plugin and generate a bundle.json file, something that the Wwise Launcher uses to know what's in those package files to install. And we're going to see that later on. Right now, let's do a little quiz. We have a couple of questions, and that will help us just introduce different concepts as we go. First things first, I guess, a lot of people have been wondering exactly where the plugins come from. Where are those files? What is a authoring plugin in the end? Because it is different from a SoundEngine plugin. In what exactly is it different? Good question. Let's have a look. Here I have the launcher with 9.2.9, latest released, installed. We can go and browse the contained folder to see where that's installed. And we're going to have a look at where are those files. So the answer to that question right now is, where are the plugins loaded from? It's loaded from that path right here. What does the Wwise root here means? It means that it's the Wwise installation path. So it's the path that gets highlighted when you do the open folder from the launcher right here, this thing. This can be set also if you have multiple instances of installations of Wwise by doing the set environment variables directly in the launcher. So I'll do that just now. So we see that Wwise root is now this path. Very useful. Go back to the Windows Explorer, allow that to do its thing. We have the path shown here, which was the Wwise root, authoring, x64, because we are on a 64 machine, release, binary, and plugins. And here we are. We have a bunch of plugins, and basically we have two files, two important files right here, the plugin name.xml and the plugin name.dll. If we look here at, for example, time stretch, we have time stretch.dll, key time stretch.xml, same thing for everything. So that's what we need to generate with our tool and for it to be loaded by the author.
Two files, what's their function? What do they do? What do they each encapsulate?
Yes, very good question. So the XML file, if we're just going to look at it, we touched it last time, but a little refresher. We have the definition of the plugin and their properties, including the restrictions on their values, for example, the valid range, where they can be inserted, their ID, and the name that it's going to be that is going to be used when it's shown in the authoring.
Great.
So that's descriptive data, stuff that can be changed as well without recompiling the plugin.
Cool.
And the DLL is a library which needs to be built using Visual Studio in this case, and has the behavior. It contains two parts of the plugin. One is the SoundEngine, the stuff that does the DSP and all the interesting stuff we did last time. And there's the authoring part, which has the implementation for the front end, behavior on how data gets built into sound banks. And everything is packaged into that DLL.
Cool. Did I hear you say that I could just go into the XML for a plugin, change the name of it, and like rename all the plugins in my Wwise installation after my cats or something?
Oh yeah, sure. You can do whatever you want. It's an open software. It's very nice.
Awesome.
You can do whatever you want, and as long as you don't change the company ID and plugin ID, it will be recognized for every single plugin. So if you change the name Wwise time stretched to something else, as long as those two values are staying the same, you can change the name to anything you want,
Awesome.
including translating it to something else.
Yeah, totally. And I don't have that many cats, so I'm going to have to come up with something, a little longer list. Okay, thinking on that. Thanks.
Exactly. Good specification right there. What do I have here? The SoundEngine part is in the DLL. That's what I wanted to mention. And for those who are wondering, well, where is the SoundEngine version of that library? The stuff that we use in the SoundEngine. It's located under the SDK part, and there's the different target, 64 VC60, 160 is Visual Studio 2019 with x64. And if you go in that bin directory, we have the DLL. So it's a different library, and that's what you need to know, essentially. When we build for Windows, that's what gets built. When we build for the authoring, we build the authoring plugin we just saw. So with that in mind, what happens when the authoring plugin has no custom GUI? Another question. It's very simple. It's exactly what we did in the part one. Basically, Wwise is super nice to us and generate one for us. Let's see, what does that look like? I have the 2019.2.9. I have the same plugin we had last time. So if you're following along, you should see something very similar on your end. Well, again, has a list, essentially, with a default control that fits the type of data. In this case, it's a number. Therefore, it's a range. And it's using the minimum and maximum values we set in our XML file. If I can probably just show you directly, if I have Visual Studio open, just like last time, we have the XML. And right here, our property had the range -96 to 10 dB. And so that's what we have here, essentially. But that's not very, that's not the nicest way that it could look. We could improve on that by creating our own custom plugin UI, and that's what we're going to do. So how do you do that? There's a couple of pieces that we have not implemented in our authoring part of the plugin. So a little reminder, what is the authoring part of the plugin? We have the Wwise plugin directory, which was created for us when we built and actually used WP New. And there's the SoundEngine plugin directory. This is the SoundEngine part, so the thing that runs in the game. And this is the authoring part, the thing that owns the UI and generates the sound bank as we tell it. So right here, that get bank parameters that we have into the authoring plugin is the function that gets called to package the sound bank data. We need to add something to that plugin part so that we have a UI.
Yeah, and I think we went deep on that in episode 1 up until this point, and so if that went fast, you have questions for yourself, well, how did you get there? Head back to episode 1, dig deep, and then you'll be right up to speed with us here as we're jumping into creating this user interface for it that's just a little bit fancier.
Yeah, and you know it's live because I will ask Samuel to actually bring the screen a little bit bigger. I'm looking at this through my screen
Go ahead.
on my iPhone, and it's so tiny.
I hope that's big enough for you now.
That's awesome. Thanks.
No problem. All right. So actually, we're going to go into the code, see what this authoring class has to offer, which we didn't touch last time. So this Again plugin is our class for the authoring part of the plugin. Again, it's under Wwise plugin. And what it does is it extends this abstract-based class in this case. It's the default audio plugin implementation. It's not abstract. It implements all the methods. So I'm speaking a bit of code-ish stuff, but what you have to just think about it is that every function that this class provides is already implemented with the default function. So we can just implement the one we need. And the ones we need for our purpose are located right here. There's the window proc, there's the get dialog, get resource handle, and all of this is referenced into the documentation, so I invite you to follow them. The pages in the documentation are referring to that, but I'm going to go with you over those just to know what do they do. So the first thing that you need to know is that the UI is generally contained into a resource file. This resource file is a Visual Studio thing that's essentially it allows you to build that UI using some front-end resource editor. And that's what we're going to use. And we need to tell Wwise where those resources are. So right now, we don't have any. So that's the first step. We need to create one. And for that purpose, we're going to use Visual Studio directly. We can't do that unless you really want to write that by hand, which I discourage. Let's do the one thing here. I'm using Visual Studio Code right here, and I added tasks to do the WP command automatically. I'm going to do them maybe for like one time in the terminal directly. So let me just show my terminal right here. Reminder of what the command looks like and how we need to call it. We have the Wwise root environment variable. That's what we set previously. And we have the path to the wp.py tool. That's how we use it. We essentially just write the Wwise root. In this case, I'm going to put it in between, not commas, but
quotation
parentheses.
marks, yeah.
Quotation mark. Yeah. Trying to come up with the names.
You're doing good.
And use the use the environment variable between percentage.
Yeah, the environment variable is what we discussed previously. It's something that sits on your system and that says pretty much this is where you need to look for Wwise root. So if you remember what you had, what you previously had in the Wwise launcher, and the lines that we said, and we said, please set the environment variables. This is where you will get that.
Exactly. Awesome. And so this will just be replaced, and that's why I added those quotation marks. It's to escape the space that's in there, because it's installed in program files and there's a space. Terminal doesn't like that, so we just put it into quotation marks, so it's a full path and interpret it as such.
Great.
So I'm just checking that it works with a help command that just displays everything that's in there. And what we're going to do is the pre-make one, the pre-make command. And instead of pre-making it for Windows, we're going to pre-make for the authoring. So it's going to generate all the solutions that we need. Right here. And it provided us with a lot of solutions. One for Visual Studio 2015, one for 2017, one for 2019. Depending on what you have installed, you can use the one that fits with your requirements right here.
And
Which in my case,
reminder of what solutions are. They are...
Yes. So solutions are let's call it a workspace. It's a context where all the projects for a certain target are centralized, essentially. And that's what Visual Studio in this case uses to figure out where are the files, how do I build the files, where do they go, and all that info is packaged into that. And every platform has a different system.
Yeah.
And by targeting the platform here with our pre-make command, it generates the correct one for the target platform we want.
And this is not, there's no version for macOS though with this.
For macOS, the authoring, you're right. Let's mention that this is a Visual Studio only setup. As far as the authoring is concerned on macOS, a reminder that this is only a wrapper through Wine that we're using. So essentially, it is the binaries that are built for Windows that are running on Mac. And this is the reason why you don't use Xcode, for example, to create a plugin UI on Mac. You essentially use the same toolchain as Windows, and it runs through that adapter system and just uses the Windows version. So if you're creating a plugin for Mac, you still have to use either a Windows machine or a virtual machine on a Mac, like I'm using actually right now.
And if you read the blog article I just posted on the first part for the new plugins, this is not something that we will change soon because we need to change a lot of code to actually make this work on all the platforms. That said, we are working on it.
Stay tuned.
Exactly. Stay tuned, please. All right. So back to our sheets. We have the solution that we want to use. I'm using Visual Studio 2019. Therefore, I'm going to choose the WAGAIN Authoring Windows VC160 solution. Just double click that thing and it's going to open in Visual Studio with a default view. And we're going to have all our files similarly to how they are displayed on VS Code.
So
right
tiny,
here.
so tiny.
Yes, so tiny. This I cannot change. That's my system font size. But hopefully you can see that on the right, we have a Solution Explorer where all the files are. And this is exactly the same as we have here. SoundEngine, plugin, Wwise plugin. The WAGAIN right here. This is the authoring plugin. And here down here we have the FX, which is the an effect plugin, SoundEngine side. That's the only difference right here. What we're going to add to that project is a resource, which includes two files, basically, an RC and a .h. The header file, the .h, has definitions for the number that corresponds to those those resource IDs. As text, they're basically defines. And the RC has all the data that's going to be built actually by Visual Studio into the binary. So to reach that, we need to have the resource view. If you don't have it, by default, I think it's not there. You can go in View, Other Windows, and there's a resources view right here, resource view.
Control-Shift-E.
Control-Shift-E. Oh, power user right here. I'm still looking up for Windows on my side.
I use it to remove it.
Yeah, I won't, except the viewers. Anywho, we have the WAGAIN right here project, and that's what we want to add the resources to. We're going to right click there, do add, and right there we have resource.
Yeah, and for the info, there's two files inside resource view. There's WiseGain and there's WAGAIN and WAGAIN FX. FX is the version for the SoundEngine. Now for the SoundEngine, you do not wish to have any resources whatsoever. This is for inside your game. And normally you don't present anything in your game. Whatever you present is through authoring only. The game, you only wish to have audio playing.
Exactly. So do make sure you don't put that under WA gain effects. So we want to add a resource. It's going to be a dialog, and I'm going to choose like this one. The prop page large has a larger size, which makes sense. Clicking new will add us the dialog right here. So that RC file I was talking about earlier shows up like this. And the list of what it contains is a hierarchy under it. We have the prop page here. That's the editor you have, and you can play around with. And that's what we're going to use to create the UI. So the default dialog just has a static placeholder. And I'm just going to show you back on Visual Studio Code side that the files that were created are the RC file here. That's how it's shown. And there's the resource.h file that I was talking about. If you want to see what's in there, it's essentially just a list of define. You'll see how it gets populated after we've used it.
Yeah, so these are totally obscure, and they are made by Visual Studio for Visual Studio, but then it helps the code that you write actually pin down, this is that property that we will add. And a property is something that you can add, which is a text box, it's a field of something, it's a button, it's anything inside. So a property, a view, a layout property is where you put all of your properties inside in order to make it look good.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And in making it look good, we're going to take that fader that comes out of the box from Wwise, and we're going to change it.
Spoiler.
Exactly. So actually, let's. What was my next question? Are we there yet? I think we're just going to go and have a look at the documentation. I think that's a good thing to do. So at this point, we can add any controls we want. The question is what controls? And as Damien suggested, why not a fader? A fader would be a good use for a gain level. And we're going
the
to
default Bing view. Oh,
search.
wow.
Yes, the Wwise SDK in Bing. Why not?
We actually started, this is a purely empty Windows, which is why you see the small activate Windows part, because we wanted to start from total scratch and make sure there's no hard dependencies on anything else. So if you start with the part one, we actually had very few things installed, pre-installed, and then we just went in and created the plugin. But it's from a basic machine that has nothing in it. So This is why you see all of that, and this is why we don't have other browsers.
Exactly. This is not my work environment. So in the Wwise SDK documentation, you end up in a page where you have everything collapse. Let me just show you where the documentation is. It's under Going Further, Creating New Plugins, Audio Plugins, like we're doing. And last time we went over the SoundEngine part. Right now we're going Wwise Authoring part. Under the Wwise plugin DLL, that's what Visual Studio is going to generate for us, we have a Wwise plugin dialog reference. That's the interesting page that has all the details you're going to want to create the different controls that Wwise ships with. So it's the exact same controls that we have, and they're teamed and tailored towards the experience in Wwise. So if you want to be at your plugin to be at home, it's suggested to use that. Now, how do we get to show this thing? We essentially use a system where we have placeholders. This thing is going to become our placeholder. We're going to do, essentially, we're going to size it roughly like a fader is, like this. Yeah, that looks like a fader. And we're going to use some, not properties, but like it's a small scripting essentially in the text. So that's static. That's a label normally in a normal window. Here we're going to change the text, which is the caption property right here. If you have the properties view, which should be by default when you open a resource, we can change that right here to do class equal. Class equal what? The class name right here is what you're going to find here for every single control. So here we want a fader, so we're going to do class equal fader. And once we build that and look at it on Wwise, this is going to be replaced at loading time by that fader. So it's almost like magic. It's great.
Yeah, it's in the box.
Yeah.
And the crazy part is there used to be about no documentation whatsoever on that. So we wrote that just to make sure that you could actually understand all of those things, because those are quite obscure. People that are in the know about resources, they all know how to do it, but it's a very minor percentage of people that actually knows how to create those. So we actually kind of improved our documentation towards that end to make it actually much easier for you to write things on this.
And to me, that's part of that commitment that Audiokinetic has to increase the accessibility to all aspects of the interactive audio pipeline. Trying to bring people who may not have all the skills, give them the education materials, give them the documentation to guide them towards accomplishing whatever it is they're trying to do. And as you mentioned, for the plugin API and writing your own Wwise plugin, this was as you said, a valuable piece of that puzzle for people who are just wading into making their own plugins for the first time. So glad to be here.
The first time I actually wrote one plugin UI like this, it took me, I think, 2 days to actually figure out what the things were doing and how and where to put things, and it was not working perfectly and everything. So we had to improve that.
Excellent.
Yeah, and now we're trying to show you directly, so that's even better. Hopefully that can be useful. So there is one missing piece of the puzzle. It's a nice control, but it's not going to be bound to any property. And that's essentially what we need to tell Wwise is, what is this control controlling? We have one property in our plugin, which is the gain level. And we would like this control to be controlling it. So the additional property we need to add right here, we add class, but we also have prop. Prop takes a name, the prop name, just like it's written in the XML. And at runtime, again, it's going to be bound to that property. And whenever you change it, it's going to adapt and save it to the model. You have nothing to do, it just works. So we're going to do that exactly. Prop equal, and you see that here, semicolon separates all those something equals something. And I'm just going to go into the XML, and I invite you to do the same, to look exactly what is the property name. Here, the property name, we left the default last time. It's called dummy, because that was the default one. The display name is gain, and so that's why it's displayed gain in the UI. I suggest if you are going to do a serious plugin instead of just a sample like we're doing, to name the properties properly, just like they are. That does mean that the variables also ideally need to be changed. I'm just not going to do that right now, but please do it. So the prop is the name dummy. And so now this thing is going to be replaced in controlling the right property when we build it. Simple as that. There are a couple of properties we need to change, though. We just need to make sure that this whole thing, if you look at the properties, I clicked in the dialog, that it's not disabled and it's visible. So right now it's disabled by default. We need to make it false, not disabled by default. And by default, make it visible. That's useful. Same thing for the static. We can make sure that this is the case. It is visible. It's not disabled. And if you want to be able to tab to it, you can enable the tab stop. So that means that when we have focus on it and we press the tab key, then we go to the next control.
And that's
so as a reminder, mostly it's you have the window that needs to be not disabled, which is upside down from everything we know. Mostly it's not enabled, it's not enabled, it's not disabled. And then it needs to be visible, and then your control that you actually created needs to be not disabled, needs to be visible, and probably have something that's called a tab stop. Why the tab stop? Because of the name of the key, tab. When you have your keyboard, you have a tab key and you can move through it.
Exactly.
And that's just Wwise functionality out of the box to be able to tab between properties in the focused view.
Hopefully.
Yes, it's 2018.2, I believe. Cool. I was the one to make it work. So the last thing is just aesthetic. So the main dialog here, you can have a border. We don't really need it in Wwise, so we're just going to put it into none. So it's essentially just going to be a flat dialog with our control in the middle. That's what we want. I saved this thing, Control S, and actually I probably should change the name of the dialog. That's the ID right here. It's what's going to be written in the resource.h. We can probably do something like WOA page, something like that. So when I change the ID of that dialog, I can have a look in the resource.h and see that when I save, it's going to be named ID WOA page right here. That's what we want.
And you don't want to edit the .h yourself unless you know what you are doing.
Exactly. Leave it to that. It kept the old one just in case something is referenced to it, but we don't care. We're not going to reference it. We have the UI essentially ready to be integrated into the plugin. The only missing part is to tell in the DLL which dialog to use and to make sure to tell it where the resource is found, which is our DLL. This is accomplished, like I showed earlier, by implementing the get resource handle function and the get dialog function. So let's bring those.
Now, what he will show you is what I tend to call boilerplate code. So mostly, if you are advanced, you want to change these, but most of internal plugins, so if you take AK compressors and all those plugins internally, they use the same boilerplate code with very little changes.
Exactly. So this populated table item, I just had to change, put AKYs in front of it because the other already was in the right namespace. I added those two functions right here in the public side of the authoring plugin. And that was in the .h. Going to the .cpp, that corresponds, same name, but .cpp. I'm going to add the implementation at the bottom of that. So you don't really want me to, to type that all in. So what I did is I already prepared it. It's somewhere here.
Now you just have to find it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the preparing is pretty much we copied it from somewhere else because, like I said, it's boilerplate code. It's all the same. So it's not something that you will do for every single fader. So if you create a fader, you don't have to do all of this. You do this once for your entire property dialog. And once it's there, it will be able to connect for everything. There's very little that you need to change. And this is the part where you will get the populate table that you will see soon.
Exactly. So first things first, the get resource handle. This is truly boilerplate. Essentially, there's two ways to tell it, take the handle of my DLL, please. There's this extern thing where you let the linker add the correct address and we return that. Or if you use MFC, there's this part of the code. So usually you just copy paste that, it's going to work, no problem. The other part is the get dialog function. So what does that do exactly? It's called whenever Wwise wants to get the ID that corresponds to a type of dialog it wants to display. In Wwise, it's relatively simple. There are two types of dialogues to display, either the settings page, which is the page you have in the effect view or the standalone view, and the other one is the contents editor, which is the bottom parts below the property. Perhaps I can just show it at this point. The contents editor part is only available for source plugins because all the other effects and syncs have their own window. That's the normal settings page, and the one I was talking about is right here, for example. We have our sign. This is the contents editor UI. So today, because we're building an effect, we're only going to work with the settings page. And this is why in my function here, get dialog, I have a switch case that essentially covers both of the options for that enum. If we look at the eDialog enum, I'm going to hit F12 and see where it's defined.
So
we have those two values.
eDialog is the part that authoring asks your plugin, I want to have this kind of dialogue. Please give me the identifier for that kind of window.
Exactly. And again, setting is the one we want. The other one, contents editor, is just going to return false, essentially, if we don't handle it. And when we do handle it, we return true. So here I seem to have messed up with the naming. How did I call it? Let's call it like this instead, like I have in my example. So it's going to work. And while we're at it, we're going to change the name of our slider to something that makes sense. In this case, I called it IDC gain slider. So again, clicking on the control, going in the property view, there's a miscellaneous ID, and that's the ID we changed. So I'm just pasting that, hitting enter and save, and that's it. Once we have that, our resource.h should contain the right stuff. Let's validate. Yes, IDDY dialog, IDC gain slider. For our file to find it, the only missing element, including the file. So we go at the top, and all we need to add here is include resource.h, which is the name of that file here. And now it's going to find it. The get dialog.
We are sending you all these information precisely because we want you to have all the different steps. However, all of those will be available, so you can actually copy paste through them and just not care. And you can also see this video back eventually and just look up at the best parts and try to figure out how we did it and why. And hopefully the explanations that we are giving you will help you figure out all the other stuff.
Exactly. So I added some comments to help you out. The get dialog does two things, actually, because it's true. We provide it with the ID of the dialog we just created. So we set it in the out UI dialog ID. It's an out param because it's as a reference here. And we set it also a populate table item. Populate table item, or populate table, really, what is it? It's a table. So it's like a map, essentially, where there's key and values. And the mapping that it provides is what control to what property, essentially. So we have that thing here. We have that thing here. We have the control. We have the dummy name of the property, and we pass that object really to the out p table, and that's the mapping that's going to be used. Of course, we added it back in our dialog, so there's like another way to do it. If you don't do it through the controls, you can do it through the out table right here, like I did. You can do both as well. It's going to work. So showing both ways.
And when you say mapping, like, it makes me think of like the literal window where this control is going to show up, and so that process then hands it off to the mapper in order to put it in the right place.
It's really the link between the front end control, so the thing that's displayed, and what happens when you change the value. It knows which corresponding property. So that's the mapping we have.
Got it.
Yeah. There are different types of controls that perhaps don't have that placeholder replace. If you do a custom widget, for example.
And
Yes.
and then not the same as the mapping of the fader within the layout. This is me being
yeah,
confused
exactly.
for a moment.
This is defined as we did in Visual Studio through the resource editor, and this ends up defined into the RC. And that RC file, if you want to read it, be my guest. Woo! But essentially, it's just a list of all the controls.
Excellent.
With their position into the dialog. That's all it
Perfect.
is. Yeah. So far, we have done not so much, but enough to have something shown, I believe. So we can just go ahead and show it. Yeah, let's cross our fingers. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. And right now I'm just going to use the the WP through the test right here. And so the command right here that I did was pre-make the authoring and also build. So full path to WP, build authoring with a configuration using release, because we're using the authoring release, not the release configuration of the authoring. We don't have access to the debug version of the authoring. And we're using x64 VC160 as a target. It supports all Visual Studio 2015, 2017, 2019, but we're on 2019. So everything looks good, I believe. It did build. And what we can do, and you can do that if you use Visual Studio Code as well, you can hit F5 and it's going to launch the Wwise Authoring application with a debugger attached. So if you put any breakpoints, we can break in it. Very useful.
Here it comes.
Woohoo! Dun, dun, dun. So we have our sound, we have our plugin added here, and we have nothing. We have nothing.
Perfect.
What did I forget?
Debug.
Yeah. Debug mode. So this is fine. This is likely fine. Let's see.
Mm-hmm. I think this is actually the best part of any live stream when you got to take the
when
deep
we are
dive.
sweating bullets. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, you can perhaps showcase that this thing is actually debuggable.
Perfect.
That's the first thing. So we don't even reach that part. So we don't get asked actually that. Ooh. I think our RC did not want to load. What have we done? I believe that's because it's running.
Mm-hmm. So, perfect place to ask folks if they have some questions. As we've been going along, I've seen a few that we've addressed along the way, but definitely feel free to give us a shout out. We're almost there. You get to kind of watch the fun happen here as we debug the launch of it. But yeah, let us know. So here's one coming in, Michel. In general, what would be the best way to go about creating these properties dynamically? For example, if the parameters required for the plugin are not known at compile time.
This is a very good question. And the answer is we cannot do it. That's the sad truth of it right now is, for example, we are working on a plugin right now, a very complex plugin, and we do not know these values at runtime. So we had to create 8 different placeholders in order to make sure to pass the values. Now, our system is very strongly typed. It's already complex enough that if we add dynamic properties, it becomes a mess. That said, you can create custom properties too. Custom properties which are not defined by in the XML, that are defined inside the dictionary, and that you can pass those values directly through it. So it's feasible, but then you go into the advanced mode to actually do that. And I will not recommend actually doing these kind of things. One good example of such plugin right now that we have is Crankcase Rev 2. Crankcase Rev 2 actually have files with a lot of information so that you can decide what your car will sound like. So these are very complex things. They have all those sounds inside. So the way they are working with this is they are using their own files inside. They are bypassing totally the XML files, which is merely a convenience. And they are doing the things themselves inside a specialized file, which is called a media file in our case. So it's possible. It's totally beyond the scope of this element, but that said, it's feasible.
Good question. Thanks for that. Samuel, it looks like you've had a breakthrough.
Yeah. Exactly. So I did a little beginner's mistake right here.
Perfect. We're all beginners.
Yes, I forgot to add my file to the Lua file. So why do we need to do that, actually? And we can see the consequence of that Visual Studio couldn't find the resource file. It wasn't listed. What I did is I pre-make using wp.py pre-make, and the file was gone. I added it originally with the Visual Studio tool. By pre-making, essentially it retook the list of files that's right there and created a solution out of it. So it could not build the RC file because it did not know about it. By adding it to that list, we're in pre-make plugin.lua right here. There's the plugin authoring files with a list of files automatically that were the one in the template. And we just need to add those two new files that we added, login.rc and the resource.h, re-hit pre-make, and build it. That should do it.
Cool.
Fingers crossed.
We can do so. We can do so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey!
And we have a fader, which is the size of the control we set in the resource editor earlier. So you can play with that.
That is
it has to be
giant
there's a minimum.
fader.
Yes. It's not because it's a giant that it's not usable. If your stuff has a very large range, for example, who knows?
Yeah.
So we can see that it uses the maximum and minimum values that we set in our XML, just like we would expect, minus 96 to 10. That's what we set. And essentially, we can see that if I hit save and I go back here, yeah, 6.5 looks good. And it doesn't even work. I believe it does. With a source like this.
Yeah.
Wow. And we have a UI.
Great.
Part one.
Awesome.
So now that you have a UI, essentially you can extend that feature set beyond what we have right here by adding other controls, by adding custom controls, by adding also static text that you don't need binding to property. You just mention that this is a fader for gain, for example. If I could just add gain static label. But there's other stuff we need to do to get our users have the best usability we can out of an authoring plugin. One thing is the help. So for people to learn how to use a complex plugin, like in this case, we have the Sound Seed Grain source plugin, which I love, by the way. we need to be able to provide either some form of documentation in the authoring or some form of external documentation that people can consult. Here, the help button that you have in the top bar of each plugin and each view really is something you can implement. You can decide what happens when people click that button. And in addition to that, when people focus any control that has a binding to a property, so we had our fader, that's one control. When I click on it, there's a view in Wwise that's called the property help, and it allows you to essentially provide a documentation snippet formatted as some HTML, or in our case with the building tool, we can have markdown and be it translated to HTML when we build. And that's going to display in that view when the user selects our control. Very useful to teach the user about the range, about what's its use for, how to use a control or a property.
It's always my first stop when I don't know what I'm exactly touching or what the range or values or result is going to be. That authoring side property help is an excellent way to communicate that. And then, like you said, being able to hit the question mark on any view and have it link to external documentation closes the loop accessibility-wise, so that it's not just you creating the plugin, you know what it's doing, you know what those controls are supposed to result in. But when you take that next step to bringing other people into this exciting world of your plugin, closing that loop for folks on the documentation side becomes really important.
Exactly. So luckily for us, it's relatively simple to implement. We go back into our plugin implementation. We're going to start with the help button. Looking at the default audio plugin implementation again, we can see the list of methods we can implement. One is called help, and yeah, you guessed it, that's what it does. So let's go back, copy that, paste it into our class, removing the default implementation, adding override, making sure that the compiler tells us if we do something that's not right. Copy it, go back to the CPP version of that. And actually, I got something prepared for us today already. That's a default implementation. And we're going to use it. So you can use that as well. It opens a link through the shell execute function of Windows. So it just tells Windows, please open this with the default way you know how. And because it's an HTTP protocol thing, it knows that it uses a browser, defaults to default browser, and then you have the page to your website, for example. In our case, Audiokinetic library, not library, but SDK documentation can be accessed that way. We are given a couple of options here. We're given the dialog, so we can implement in the same function different help for different views. Because we're using only the settings dialog again, we check that we're using this one and return true if we do and false if we don't. And we're going to check if the language code here, because Wwise support couple of languages. We have English, Korean, Chinese, and Japanese. And we can refer to a page in that language. The code is in that format. You can go look it up on the Wikipedia, but it's essentially 2 characters, which we have in our URL. Simple as that. We simply build that, and when we hit the help, we get to that website. Before building, I'm going to show you as well how to add property help documentation, which I, again, had prepared in advance. Here, let me show you where to put it first. So in Wwise plugin, we have a folder with the authoring plugin, and what we don't have currently is that res folder. That res folder, we add it, and add another folder called MD for Markdown. Inside of that, we can add as many folder for the corresponding language code that we have. Could be Japanese, for example. Here I only have English. And inside of that, res MD English, we have a list of MD files, markdown files, that have the name of the property, same as in the XML. So again, we're referring to the same property name, and it's just going to figure out that this is the corresponding file for the property. Here I have a placeholder MD that just says that it's a game. That thing here is a header, and as you put more, it goes into a lower header, and then some text. And this is going to be turned at the build time into some HTML that Wwise understands and can display. Very simple. So we're just going to copy it into our actual plugin.
The MD file format is actually a very standard format. It's used in GitHub, for example. So if you go through most open source packages, you will see a readme.md file. You will see a license.md file. Sometimes it's used throughout the world for many things. So the MD file that we provide is no different than the MD files that are being provided through Xcode or GitHub or any other MD generators or MD viewers.
Exactly. And building it is simple because we do need to build it, essentially, to turn it into an HTML file. It's through the build command, except the target platform is the documentation. So we're just going to build it. And in this case, if it's the first time and you did not follow the SDK help, you're going to get some errors because modules will be missing. Let me just show you where those are listed. If you go here, we're back into the SDK documentation, same spot, except we have using the development tools right here. And the list of requirements is exactly here. So you can just copy paste that into your terminal. Actually, I'm just going to do it here.
For people on their phones, what are the lines?
Yes. So it's pip install. So that means Python packager, essentially, to install those libraries, Markdown and JIT2. So let's write that down. I'm going to put in the same line. Pip is on my pad. It is. And now that should work. It does. Perfect. So now that we have that, we can just go ahead, build the rest of the plugin, and see what it does. Shell execute. Oh, there's some dependency to that shell execute function that we need to add. It's the shell API.h.
The dependencies that we have right now, these are system required dependencies because we actually ask the system, please execute this. So we need to have something where the compiler will know where to find that function. And this is why we need to add the include. This is the same reason why we added the include resource.h, because this is a new file that we created that contains all the information from the resource editor from Visual Studio. So we say, please, when you create that file, please look these functions into that place. So this is the requirement from most programming languages. Python has those same requirements. Whenever you try to add something, whenever you try to add a module, you need to tell it, please look this up at that place. The reason being our computers are too slow. There's hundreds of millions of headers everywhere, and actually adding them for every single file will be ludicrous. So mostly we need to say to the system, please, by the way, add this up to the list.
Exactly. And if you're wondering where to find those magical headers, just Google the function. If you find it somewhere, someone says, hey, use that. Microsoft documentation is rather good on that front. You have the shell execute, and if you go down at the bottom of a page, you usually have the header mentioned here. So shell API.h, that's what I had. Shell32.lib, you would need to link that. It's linked by default in our case, so no need to. and it built, so we can test it. Test it. And here we are. It remembered the last value that we set. That's good. Means that it's working. And let's hit help. And we go to Audio Kinetic. We saw there was an EN right here. And what about Japanese? Let's try help documentation language, Japanese. See if that works. Hey, Japanese doc. That works. Incredible. So happy about that.
And I was able to remember the help chords. Not fun.
Underscore.
Great.
It's called underscore. Nice.
Yeah.
And if you are keen-eyed, you can see here I'm selecting some properties. You can see the property help that's shown by default with the corresponding documentation because we build the documentation. When I click on our custom property, hey, our text is shown. Useful.
And the top chunk of it describes the default value, the range, the units, and then we've got a little text in there. It's just like, hey, this is what this thing does.
Exactly. And you, it's a good point, Damien. The part of that data was provided by the XML, so the range and all that stuff. We don't have to write that. All we had to do is to write the name of that thing and the description. The name ended up here, and the description ended up here.
And it pulled the values automatically from it.
Exactly.
Awesome.
So not too much work for us. There's what time is it? 4. Okay.
Question flying in from the chat: is it possible to include lists or even an image in the property?
That's a good thing. Essentially, the render that's being done here is an HTML library. There's a subset of what it can do. I have not seen it display image. We have not tried it though. So there's a subset of HTML that's supported. I would have to check exactly what is supported, but what's for sure is that you can definitely do bold, underline, italic, all the basic stuff to edit. At least have a different look, bullet points. Stuff like
cool.
that.
And for everything else, there's a pointer to the question mark for folks, and they can always jump to a web page with all the bells and whistles.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Nice.
Right. So we're at the last step of our journey, which is relatively large one, to be honest.
But this is
the last step.
This is the fun part, right? Because we're gonna we've got our fader in. We want to get some information back and bring it into our plugin.
Exactly. So hopefully I get this right for the first time. Oh, didn't load.
Cool.
Reload. Yeah. Okay. There was an image here. It's fine. I got it. So how does the SoundEngine plugin communicates with the authoring? A reminder again. Here we have a schematic that we shown on episode 1, which is the whole architecture of the authoring SoundEngine plugin stuff. We have the authoring on one side. We have the SoundEngine on one side. When we profile, what do? We create a link here between those two instances. They can communicate in both ways. Authoring can push data to it, to the plugin by changing the properties. And the SoundEngine itself can provide some profiling information, we call monitor data, that the authoring can then show to the user. We have many instances of that. Meters are the most obvious case, but Granular Syn has some nice displays of grains that's provided through that monitoring data. We can do something quite similar, perhaps not as fancy in the short amount of time that's given to us, but we'll try. So for the first time today, we're going to touch the SoundEngine part of the plugin. That's right here. We have wah gain effects under SoundEngine plugin. Let's look at the DSP we had like last time. We added a single line. It was pretty straightforward. We had a gain right here where we multiplied it by a factor converted from a dB value. What we want to do today is provide what was the input and what was the output level of the game before and after processing. And we want to show that in the authoring. So we're going to do that with some magic math, an RMS value, just because we can, and it's fun. One thing, we don't always want to process that. If you're actually running in a game and no authoring is connected, there's no point in computing such a large and costly value as an RMS. We just need to ignore those cases. How do we do that? We can easily do that by adding an if to tell us, are you profiling? The SoundEngine can't tell us that. So we're just going to grab the code again that I prepared. Oh, that's my current plugin, not the reference one. Yeah, part 2.
So the SoundEngine part is much more optimized. You want to optimize the thing, and it's the part where it will actually play in your game. And like we said in part 1, this is the place where you actually wish to have the best code possible. And to be honest, this is a simple code. This is a simple piece of code. And there are ways to optimize this through ridiculous amounts by using weird commands that are available, which are called SIMD, that only really big buffs of DSPs and audio processing will know about. But mostly these are commands that will process multiple instructions all at once, so it gets the result way faster. So these are examples of things that we want to actually achieve in order to get to a SoundEngine plugin that actually works really quickly and efficiently. So this is why we want to make sure that all the changes that we are doing inside that are not costly if you are not running in authoring. If you are running in authoring, you want to have these data. You want to know exactly what happens. You want to see, you want your end user, the people who are creating stuff with your plugin to know exactly what's happening and have a lot of interactive cool things. You want to have that mixer module with all the Christmas lights going on all the time. You want to have that. This is normal because if anything happens, you want to be able to tell what is inside that and actually react really quickly. But when it plays into a game, you want to optimize that.
Exactly. And so what we're going to use was the if I was referring to. Is this one. It's can post monitor data, and we're using that through a structure that's being provided to us when we get our plugin initialized. That code was already there in the template when we basically created it last session. You can see in the init, it's getting provided right here as a context, getting set as a member variable, and now we have access to it. So let's use it. We can use it through the arrow because it's a pointer, and we want to see what's in there. You can see the list of functions. One of them is a can post monitor data, and this is going to return false when we're not profiling. We're not interested. In any case, we're not interested about monitor data. I added 2 values here, 2 variables that are real32 floats. And I'm going to compute an RMS. So what is an RMS? It's the root of the mean of the squares. And essentially, we do a sum and of the squares. So we do power of 2 of all the samples. We sum that, we divide that to get an average, and then we take the square root of that. And then that's going to give us 2 values that we're going to send to the authoring, to the channel that context provides us with. So let me add that code. There's the first part, which is before, I did the wrong place, but before the processing and after the processing, which is the same thing, but with the other variable.
And you need to do this for every single sample that we are going through. So if you have 48,000 samples in stereo all the time, it's 96,000 samples that needs to do this function twice. This is why you want to optimize these out.
Yes, and of course that's not the optimized version at all. I'm just doing a naive first pass for demonstration purposes. This is going through all the channels, all the buffers in a channel, therefore all the samples in the whole buffer of all channels. And after we're done summing those values, right here, let me adjust my indentation. We're going to do the last step, which is taking the average and the square root.
Yeah, and while you are doing this, I will answer one question. Is it possible to read-write data from an external file during plugin runtime? So this is why you typically wish to actually go through authoring, or you wish to actually go through the SoundEngine's good parts instead of having your own files. If the platform that you are providing your plugin for does not support external files, for example, iPhone, iOS, you cannot go inside your folder for your product and actually have meaningful reading or meaningful writing through that. And you have the same issue with Android, which has other paths, other ways to put things. Then you have Mac OS, iOS, Linux, you have Windows, and all the platforms, the gaming platforms that you currently have. Most of these have different paths, and most of these have different ways to read and write files. If you go through media files and the XMLs and getting data for your plugin through that, you will not have to handle all of these extra special cases for all the different platforms. And if you do not use if you use the monitor data to actually provide data back to authoring for your own debugging purposes, then you will not have any issue again for these platforms and trying to figure out, yeah, I have a file, let's give an example, on a PS5. And I have no way to actually get it back. How do I get it back? So because it's on a console. So it's actually, this is the reason why we are putting bidirectional ways to actually get and set things. It's because otherwise there's very little normal ways that you can actually send and receive those files back. But then the platform is there. So if you wish, do whatever you want.
So the happy path is to leverage what's in the box, what's in the environment, and in that way it becomes a cross-platform solution. If a developer is targeting one platform, they know that structure, they know the location. It is possible.
Yeah.
Great.
Exactly. The hardship is always making it work everywhere. So if you're doing something personal, nobody's gonna stop you. But it's always it's relatively discouraged unless you're really doing like recording and stuff like that has to end up in the file somewhere. So what I did, probably not just gonna go over it too much. Don't worry about it. We divided by the amount of samples, square root. What's is important is that we converted those from linear to dB because there was some conversion. Essentially, those samples are not in dB form, and it would be nice for the user to have it in dB form. It's the inverse of the macro we used last time, dB to lin, so lin to dB. I added it, so it's not that don't look it up in the Wwise SDK, but it's a very simple log10 of the value times 20, so some math magic. And the important element here is that we're essentially serializing the data. What does a word like serializing mean? Sounds kind of crazy when you say it, but it just means putting the bits into a certain format that we're going to know is the exact same format in the other side, so we can turn it back into individual variables and access it. So how did I do that? Because it's simple, we have only two floats. I did an array of 2 floats, 2 real 32. And this is going to be passed to the post monitor data, which is the function from the context that allows us to send stuff to the authoring as what I would call an opaque pointer. It's a void pointer. So this function, it doesn't know what we passed to it. It's really just an address. And the first address of an array is sufficient for it to work. What we do need to tell it, though, because it doesn't know what it is what size it is. So size of will give you the size of that full array, because it knows the size of what's in it. If you were to do a struct, more advanced stuff, more data, size of the struct would be good. Just make sure that packing for those people's working there is okay, because the size might be different depending on which target you compile it for. For today, simple case, 2 values, it's going to work.
Yeah, and I want to touch base on can post monitor data also.
Yes.
It will be easy to do if you are in debug or profiling, and then you verify things. I will give you one context where monitoring data is actually quite awesome. You have a tester somewhere that runs a version that is on their device, and then you have authoring, and you actually wish to monitor that person's code. It's on another computer. It's not even a question of having the same file. It's on another computer. So you might actually wish to have a not totally optimized version of your code, which can post monitor data inside that, so that you can actually connect through the network to the other computer and figure out exactly what data you are getting through your plugin. So this actually will work across devices, platforms, everything. You have your iPhone, it's on the same network. You will be able to connect through it because you have the unoptimized version, and you will be able to actually get that data back on your own authoring on your computer because you use these kind of things. So you can actually use a file if you wish, but those actually have quite a lot of bad uses if you wish.
Yeah, you did touch on an important thing, though, that I forgot to put in my example. It's using the AK optimize define that we define when it's a release build, essentially. So this if def will definitely get rid of all that, even that if for a release build that you cannot essentially connect using the authoring. You can only connect when the communication module is loaded, which we usually do in debug and profile, but not release.
And that was it. Release, debug, and profile. These are the 3 kinds of builds that we provide. The release build, which again strips out all of this ability to get this information back from a machine.
Yeah. Exactly.
But
and
for now, you might not wish to have that because we are building in release, though.
Interesting fact that we're not building in release the SoundEngine part. The SoundEngine part is actually built in profile when we're using it through the authoring. So that means that it's always going to be fine, and this is safe to do if. But you're absolutely right, though, that if you test that and build in release for Windows, not the authoring, you are not going to get those things. So no game will be able to get that data. Good point.
And this is why you have the release. And when we said that we put release because this is the release version for authoring, authoring will always have the unoptimized path.
Exactly.
When you do the SoundEngine parts, you might actually wish to have the profiling version available for your platform because that one will have the unoptimized path too. That way you can actually connect to your authoring.
Great. So that's nice. We can send data. The only missing part now is to be able to receive it. So we go back to the authoring side of the plugin. We go back to what's offered in our default audio plugin implementation, and we're going to see that there's one function called notify monitor data. and that's the function that gets called whenever something is ready for us to consume.
Okay.
And it's been sent through.
Different than get plugin data.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. Good point. Get plugin data, that's an interesting function that has to do with custom data you want to add and save in your XML that's not covered by the standard properties type. So it's not a string, it's not a number, it's not a bool. You can create some custom stuff and save it like that. And that allows you to grab that data.
Excellent.
That you save.
When we talked about dynamic properties, you wish to actually do that through the get plugin data version, and you do not wish to actually use the XML to provide those. So you create your own stuff, you're on your own turf, and you can then serialize the data yourself through the same thing, serializing that we just explained. And you have the get bank parameters for your XML, and you wish to call get plugin data at the end of get bank parameters so that you can get your data.
Yep. Yeah. So instead, not using that one, we're going to use this one. It has a lot of stuff, but we're not going to use that many.
And this is back to notify monitoring data.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Setting the virtual for good measure. There's one thing that's missing right here. Notify monitor data, it's going to be called, that's for sure. But how are we going to add, actually set the text into controls? First, we don't have controls to set text to, so that's one part missing. The other part is that our plugin doesn't even know about what is the dialog currently being used. We need to add that feature. The simplest way is to just use the window proc. This is essentially the procedure of the window. That's all the events that Windows is going to feed us are handled here, and that's where you're also going to add custom behavior like enabling or disabling controls and handling some custom events for commands. That's like Windows front-end development. We're not going to touch too much today, but at least having this function is a good start.
And the fun part about the window proc function is this exists since the first version of Windows 1.0. It always existed through the same exact function name. That said, we modified it very slightly so that we can add the dialog, which dialog that you actually wish to have. And you will get called for every single, nearly every single function calls that Windows has. We pass them through to you so you can do your own custom data handling. We are using this internally. So window proc is the function that we get called for every single function, for every single window. You move your mouse on one of our authoring window. You will actually, you get the window proc getting called to say, yeah, the mouse moved from this to there, and then it click at that place, and then the window, oh yeah, something happened somewhere. So we get called for every single piece of things. I'm trying to get best the good words here. That Windows might actually handle through that. So we are sending these for your own window. So you can create whatever custom things that you might wish to do.
Exactly. And the documentation is very, very complete on that front. So I invite you to look at MSDN, how to program this thing. For today, we only need to handle two types of messages that are Windows messages. It's the init dialog, so when our dialog gets created and is ready to be used, and our destroy dialog, so when everything is getting destroyed, we just need to clean our stuff, make sure that nothing references anything that's not valid anymore. And the one variable we're going to need to access all of the controls that we have in our dialog is the H window. It's provided to us directly in the argument. And the only other thing we do is making sure that we're, again, only handling the settings dialog. Any other types of dialogs we don't care about, we don't implement, so we return false. Switch case is going to go over the list of cases we support, in this case, the init dialog. That's the in message and the parameters, and we're just going to save it. Save that H window, it's a value that it's just an identifier for us to use the Windows API into a member variable, which I need to add. So let's go back to the .h into the private area. I will add of type H window, all caps, MH window. So my H window, member H window.
H window is a Windows specific type, so this is why it's written like that. Again,
Exactly.
something from Windows 1.0.
So it's a window handle. That's why the H. You're into archaeology. Once we have that, that's good. We just need to add the missing notify monitor data function, and that's what's going to do the work for us in terms of setting the text and unwrapping what we've serialized. So we are going to deserialize the data, turn it into variables we can use. So going to go over relatively quickly. Notify monitor data, what does it provide us? It provides us with monitor data, which is essentially a pointer to a structure that has multiple monitor data that's provided by data size. So this is really an array. And inside of that, there is the actual data that we used post earlier to send. Why is that? It's because this function is called even when you have multiple instances of your plugin being run in the game in the SoundEngine side. So you have, for example, 3 times the gain, one applied on an NPC, your playable character, and for example, the wind. If the effect page is being shown, it's going to need to handle all of those into the view because there's only one view for that instance. So all the instances going to be piled up into that array, and you are now left to handle and show all that data however you want. For today, because we have only one instance, and it's a very simple case, we're just going to handle the first one. The rest we're just going to disregard. And there's a couple of other stuff. We are not going to go too much into it. Need byte swap, that's relatively an old relic of the time where big endian was a thing in consoles. Now it's pretty much all little endian. And if you've downloaded the beta, you're going to see that in the newer API, it's gone. So little endian everywhere. Real time, again, we're not going to care. We're going to handle everything regardless. What do we do? We're doing some validation, added some comments you can read just to explain what those values give us. But once everything is fine, we have data, we have a window, we're just going to make sure that the data is not null and it's of the right size. And once we have the right size, we can convert it directly by accessing it in pdata, first element, so we access directly. And pdata, that's the value that we did post monitor data earlier. So this thing really is our old array of 2 elements. It's a copy of it. And we can basically access it just like an array because that's what it is. First element was the before, and the first being the 0 index, and 1 is the second element, is the after. What we want to do really is to set that value as text to a label. We're missing some of those labels currently in our dialog. We're going to add it. And we're missing some function to convert it to a string, which is provided by the string.h include, which we're going to add right now. Yeah. So this is taken care of.
So these are all, let's say that they are quite advanced. We want to show them to you because we feel that this is a part that most people don't take care of because it's quite complex to actually achieve right. And the first time you actually do that, it's you are elated that you actually were able to do something like this. So by having simple code that actually works towards this. We hope to democratize that idea. And these functions, get dialog item, set window text W, these are all functions from the Windows API. So we are not doing things that are quite crazy. We are doing things, well, yes, but not that actually. We are doing things that most Windows programmers will know, will have a knowledge on this. So please bear in mind that these are not our APIs. We are merely showing to you how to easily do this through our resource and through our system.
Exactly. So you can, again, look those functions up. I'm going to briefly mention what they do. Get dialog item, it gives us an H window. So similar to the one we had for a dialog, it's a handle, just a pointer to the control that we want to change stuff in. And we're using the ID to poke into our dialog to give us that handle out of it. This does not exist yet. We're going to create it. And then we do set window text W, because wide string on Windows. And it just takes that control and says, give it some text. And that's the text we're giving it. So this is going to look something like, if I were not to put it like, hello. This would work too, but this would print hello. Right now, we want the value that we passed. So let's go back for one last time into Visual Studio.
And while you are doing this, H window, just because it might be complex for people who are not used to that, it's not only for a window. Like you've seen here, a handle inside a window, a handle for a window, a handle for a control in a window. This is a handle. This is Windows handle mostly.
And in our case, that handle is going to be the value that we've set up in numerical data.
I will give you example of handles inside the page that you currently see here. What you have as a dialog, this is a H window. This is a handle window. The crossfader, the fader that we did, sorry, it's not a crossfader. The fader that we added is a H window also. The values that we are adding here are H window. Any text that we write inside that are H window. Anything that you see inside any given window of Windows system mostly is a H window. Anything, you can interact with it or not, it's a H window.
Exactly. So I'm just going to describe what I'm doing right now. I'm adding text. So I went back into resource view, went back into our RC. We have the same dialog that we had before, except I'm using the toolbox, which is hidden on the left right here. If you probably did not notice, it's right here. And this is a list of all the controls that are available for us to use. And again, I'm just using static text, not placeholders, really, just an actual label, and I'm setting them and placing them to use, and it's going to display in Wwise being teamed as in the current team, so the correct color. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. There will be two values. So essentially, I added two static that I'm not going to change the text of, and two that I am going to change the text of with code. Let's see that this is before, this is after.
Yeah.
And we just need to give them the correct ID that we use in the code. Right here, we have input level. Let's call that. Again, using the ID entry for that control. And the after is probably going to be output. What do you think?
Are these visible by default?
These being the controls. I believe they are. I'm just going to make sure. Yes, they are. Good
They are
point.
by default. Good. And for reference, in this window, we have the dialog itself, which is a H window. We have the fader class, which is a H window. Before and after DB, the text are H window. If we wanted to change these texts, we could actually achieve it. And before and after text inside the ones that we will change are also each window. So these are not windows. Yes.
Each window everywhere.
Exactly.
I'm going to show off some stuff, just perhaps you don't know about them. You can use a couple of features of that property editor to place stuff correctly. I encourage you to do so. You can change the alignment of the text right here. That's one thing. We're going to align it to the right. Same here. Align text. Put some nice comments.
And this is really useful because in some languages, the text might be much longer. So I encourage you, if you actually work in English, to at least add twice the size of your zone for other languages. I'm thinking about you. French is a good example, but German is actually quite good. And the opposite being true for languages like Chinese, which is much simpler because these are ideogram inside.
Right. Using RMS, I kind of forgot they were RMS values. And if you want to make them perfectly aligned, bring your attention to those controls here. You can make them align to the right. Those will be aligned to the left, and we can align them to the bottom, so they are perfectly lined up. I like it when it's lined up. All right, so we're done with Visual Studio for today. Just going to make sure that the resource.h got the right values. Visual Studio is going to find it for us. Yes, thank you, Visual Studio. Such a nice tool. Going to build again the plugin, and hopefully this time we're going to have some data. Nice.
Edge of my seat. This one.
I don't have a song for monitor data. If anyone has any on the chat room, I'll be happy.
There's one thing. It cannot be on the sound. It needs to be on a bus. So that's one thing we need to make sure. Because there's a one-to-one relationship between the instance and the stuff right there. And now we have the default text because it hasn't been called, that nothing has been changed. What about when we capture and we play a sound that has a source, ideally? Wow!
Yeah!
And I'm just going to loop it, make sure that, let's see the RMS values. Oh, did I change? Yes, the gain right here. We can see that this was the original value. The 14 corresponds to our 14.1 roughly, because it's a window of various size of samples, so it's varying. And at the end, it goes down towards the infinity, towards minus infinity. That's what this thing means. It's the default way of two strings to display it. And so, haha, we have monitoring data coming out directly from the SoundEngine.
That's gorgeous. I want to recap the high-level steps from where I understand them. You set up the data on the plugin side with all the maths to actually prepare those values, or get those values, and from there it was all about and that was on the SoundEngine side.
Exactly. So this is the SoundEngine part of the plugin. And again, it's built into the authoring, but it's a separate part of the plugin that's only doing the SP.
Exactly. Then from there, we went back into the plugin side and authoring to get that monitoring data.
Exactly.
And once we had that monitoring data flowing back into authoring, we prepared the UI with the static text that we wanted to describe, and the data coming from the engine that was dynamic when it's being profiled, resulting in that beautifully and well aligned display inside of the effect plugin window.
Precisely. And again, it's a very crude example because we're just using text. You could be using other custom ways to display. You could implement your own widget or use some of the other widgets we have, captions, for example. But yes, you got the good idea. You can do from here anything you want with that data that you got from the SoundEngine.
Awesome. I'm blasting out a link to the Git repository where this full example is available for anyone to grab, pick it apart. Again, follow along with this live stream and see with your own eyes in your own environment how this has been implemented, compare notes, and yeah, like you said, it's a primitive example that makes for a clear illustration of that process. So valuable.
Yeah. We're down to only one remaining item that's going to be very fast. It's how do we get that thing installed? So we want to share our awesome gain with our friends. How are they going to use it? We know that the files are the XML and the DLL file. We could just ship that. But then what about the other platforms? Probably they want to use the launcher, right? Because they don't want to move around unzipping stuff. Let's the tool do the work for us. Oh, that's the next thing. Right here, the two missing commands that we talked about in the beginning of the stream was the package and the generate bundle commands. Essentially, what you need to pass to those commands is a version. So that's the version that's going to show up in the launcher, and the target platform. So there's going to be a package for the authoring, a package for every version of Windows VC something that you used. It could be for Android, and then they're going to generate an archive. So let's see what it generates for us in the authoring case. In the authoring case, I'm just looking at the files. It looks like a tar.exe right here. So we have a release and a debug version. We have basically just created the little hierarchies of how our plugin is going to be extracted when the launcher installs it. So you could look at the internal of that archive and just see that it's the same hierarchy as the Wwise installation. Very simple. And again, we can do that for Windows VC 160. Why not? Point is, once we have packaged all the platforms we wanted to support, we're going to have a list of tar.exe. And the only missing element for the launcher to understand what to do with those is the bundle. The bundle is a JSON file that describes the list.
JSON? What's
JSON? Oh, JSON. It's not JSON, but JSON, I believe. JavaScript, blah, blah, blah. I don't remember exactly what it means, but it's essentially a format that's kind of akin to XML, really, but it's a bit different, uses braces, and it's just a descriptive format for data, general data. In this case, it has the ID of our plugin, it has the name of our plugin, description, list of file, and even an image in the base64 format that you could change. The template I'm looking at right now with comments, you can turn it right here to tell it that it's JSON C. It's JSON with comments. We want to turn that thing into a proper bundle.json. That's going to include the version right here. This is just a template. So you don't need to do that by hand, of course. We've built a tool for that. The command is just wp.py, generate bundle. Once you have all those tar.exe lying into your project folder, it's just going to find them and create the bundle JSON. Nothing to do.
Through the package function?
Yeah. Right there, bundle JSON. It's got all the stuff. It's a bit all squished, so we can just do format document if you want to really see what's in there. There's the list of the files with the SHA-1, so we know that the download succeeded if it went through the network, for example, all that kind of stuff. Point is, now the launcher sees it and it understands. If we have our installation here through the launcher, there's a tab, plugins right here. that lists all the plugins that are installed. Ours ends in there because it was not installed through the launcher, but we can add it. We can add it by add from directory right there, bottom, and browse to our directory for our plugin. So it's just the main directory where the targ's in. The bundle JSON essentially is. Select. Oh, wow. And now it has a description. And we see it. The image is white, so not very interesting. I suggest you change it. Something more interesting, and we can do install. Of course, sharing a folder is kind of a hassle. So I'm going to show you how to do a zip that the launcher is going to understand. The only requirement really is to have a single folder and put everything in there, and then zip that folder and not the individual files. That's the only little thing to remember. So we have gain version, what was it? 2019.2.0.1 that I added. Let's use that. I'm putting the tar.exe. I'm putting the bundle.json into this folder. And then let's use Windows send to compress zip folder. It's going to create a zip. And then we just point the launcher to it, except we don't use add from directory. We use add from archive. Doop. Ta-da! And so it unzipped, looked at the bundle, and voila, we get a plugin that's known in the launcher. We can do install.
And this is interesting for community plugin, of course, but it's also quite interesting for companies that actually have multiple Wwise installations, or for people who are working as third parties for sound creation, and those people that work at home for different things. If the company actually has specialized plugins that they actually wish the sound designer to use, they can package it through the system and send it really easily through a folder where you can actually do like this, install from a path, or copy really easily that plugin inside the proper path, instead of having that awkward way of sending things through Perforce and copying everything in Wwise and just making sure everything works like most companies do.
Exactly. So I invite you, if you do a GitHub repo of your own plugin you want to share as a release archive, that could basically be the release archive with all the widely available, of course, platforms that are included.
Yeah, and you don't have your source code inside, so if you wish to keep your private parts private, that's good too.
Exactly. There's only the binaries right in there.
And the help.
Yeah. And the help. Yeah, of course. Want to help our users. Understanding what's going on. Last question. That was not really a question. It was mostly like how to inform you on developing a plugin. What are the requirements? So if you want to submit a community plugin to us so that it can eventually be included in the launcher, that's something you can do. However, you have some requirements to comply to. Put the links right here. We're probably going to put in the description, simply in English. You can find them under going further, creating new plugins, just like before, but it's right here, key technical requirements. What you can and cannot do using your community plugins. I want to be fair with everybody, no backdoors or any of that stuff. And actually, if you want to test your plugin, so to send it to us, you have to go through some testing guidelines, and actually just good testing guidelines for you in general. User interface, functionality, you can go through all that list of test cases, really. It's located under Wwise Authoring part, testing your plugins. There's a whole bunch of stuff to test, and we do invite you to test it as well on Mac using the Wwise Authoring through the wine layer that we discussed previously. So again, it's the Windows build that you're testing through that layer. And you do need a Windows machine in terms of requirements to build the plugin. So at least for the authoring part.
Yeah, all those information are actually quite important for game studios, especially the bigger ones, but the smaller ones also. Game studios are really protective about whatever they put inside their software, and for good reasons, because they are being asked by the platform vendors to actually comply with very strict rules. So, for example, not sending data through the network. Well, yeah, of course, because you need to punch a hole through your platform in order to do that. Otherwise, you are not even able to connect to a third-party server. If you keep data for the user, you need to inform the user. So you can have different problems with your ESRB or other guidance or compliance, especially for games that are accessible by children. So these rules are not there just for no random reasons. They're there because we need to provide those very clearly to game studios, and you will not get traction if you don't follow them.
Awesome.
Exactly.
And a follow-up question, is there a plugin validation tool for Wwise plugins like there is for audio units and VSTs?
Yeah, it's a neat idea, really, that we've definitely envisaged in implementing. Although right now we do not have such a testing the environment, really. The test cases should get you most of the elements, but it is manual work. But you are encouraged at least to implement some testing facility into your plugin. So if you're testing your DSP code directly, you can definitely do that using some testing framework. Catch2 is a good example of that. But as far as like fuzzing interfaces and all that kind of stuff, we don't currently provide any solution for that.
Cool. Good suggestions. So at this point, I think we're ready to wrap with some resources for people to reach out and find out more.
Absolutely. So we're probably going to put those links again in the description, but the Wwise Q&A, there are good categories of section. You can tag your post with Wwise plugins, for example, to get some help from the community, and we're always looking out on that channel to help with plugin making if you have difficulties. The Wwise SDK documentation, again, that's the most obvious part, but it's often forgotten. Creating your own plugin, that section into under there's a lot of info, and we've added more and more, especially in the upcoming version. So hopefully, if you've registered for the beta, you already have an even more complete version of that documentation. So do refer to it. And for the community in general, hashtag Wwise, hashtag Game Audio. Always there's a Reddit, I know, for Wwise and for Game Audio. There are Discord channels, and there's always Twitter and Facebook groups. Facebook like Wwise and Wizard that we're always following. So many folks out there that I'm sure are happy to help and collaborate. And we're always looking out for those channels as well.
You are not alone. There are people out there who are doing this every day. Some of them professionally, some of them because they just want to extend their workflow and extend the functionality that Wwise offers, and can be part of the runtime equation to do these cool things interactively with sound. So. There's definitely folks out there if you're looking.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this was a fantastic episode. Really jumped off of the environment setup and first steps into creating a plugin that episode 1 started with. Push that even further into the user interface and the monitoring data, which pretty fantastic functionality that allowed. And where are we going next with this? I think we still have more to talk about, but we're going to cut it off for today. What are we going to cover next time on the plugins Wwise episodic live stream series?
There's a lot of stuff that we could have covered already, but of course, the in-depth thing of how do you create a plugin will need some more time. So there's always the upcoming feature set of 21.1 that we're really excited about. We have a new revised API for that, which is touching the authoring side. That's one thing. And there's the importance of object processors as new concept in terms of plugins that we definitely want to touch on. So I think those are two essentially large areas that we're going to see in the future.
Great. I think we'll use that as the jumping off point for next time. And please let us know if these are helpful to you. What else could we be providing? What other context can we give you as you move forward with authoring Wwise plugins? We're definitely, I think as we're showing here today, attempting to enable a level of accessibility to be able to pull off cool tricks that might not come out of the box with the Wwise environment. And so please let us know if there's other things that you think would be helpful to enable that creativity that you have inside of you. We're actively working to find ways to enable that and help you come up with the coolest game audio out there. So with that, thanks to everyone who's hung out in the chat. Great to have your questions coming in and out. Good to see some familiar faces there. Appreciate that. Samuel, Michelle, well done.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you all for being the warriors that you all are with us, sticking in for maybe almost 2 hours now. So
we did it.
Yeah.
Are we going out singing or at least
Singing?
playing?
It's a must.
At least
singing with an instrument, perhaps.
Okay. So, Wwise Up on Air, thank you for coming. See you next time.
See you next time.